How pathological demand avoidance in brackets PDA can be identified as a neurodevelopmental disorder independently from autism by Richard Woods at London South Bank University, PhD student, and I am currently on a gap year. So yeah, neurodevelopmental. There we go. I can say it once I slow down. Okay, so a bit about my perspective. I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome in 2012. But I'm currently trying to use a post-autistic identity. So what I mean by that is I'm trying to base my identity independent from the various psychiatric categories that can be mapped onto my spiky profile. So I do meet Elizabeth Newson's PDA profile, but I'm not emotionally attached to it, and I am part of the critical autism/disability studies group at London South Bank University. And as I said, I am on a gap year for my PhD. I'm the PDA Special Issue project lead in the journal Frontiers in Education, and I do peer review PDA manuscripts. So I do take a social construction based approach to psychiatric categories. So that should be reflected in my language and terminology used. So yeah, I do have some conflicts of interest. So I do have conflicts of interest for developing various PDA tools, such as the PDA belief scale. I do earn some income from delivering training sessions on PDA. So yeah. Oh, I also reluctantly advocate for PDA to be identified as a standalone category, but that's mainly because like I said, the PDA is not going anywhere more than I actually think it should be. So moving on. Oh yeah, if you'd like to like this video and subscribe to the channel, it would help. If not, like you don't have to. So yeah, a bit brief overview of the topics in this video. So it's going to be briefly covering what PDA features look like, what a neurodevelopmental disorder looks like within the DSM-5, and how PDA can be viewed as a neurodevelopmental disorder. How PDA could be identified as a neurodevelopmental disorder, and kind of like commentary on that, and then some reflective questions at the end, not in here. Also, just a brief note on I'm using numeric referencing style instead of Harvard referencing. Apologise if I've been a bit sloppy with the numeric referencing. I'm still getting used to it. So yeah, a bit about this. So this is a diagram showing 11 continuums of features. So the red end says that the feature is impaired or highly impaired, and the green end is less impaired or less of an issue. So you got anxiety, kind of avoidance of ordinary demands, bullying, harassment, lying, stalking, stealing, like fantasy and roleplay, impulsivity, obsessive behaviour that can be focused on other people, need for control / drive for autonomy, rapid mood changes, reinforcement-based approaches do not work for PDA, and the express social motivative behaviours. So they are either manipulative or strategic. The terminology is interchangeable, and fear of mind is meant to be less of an issue. Well, it's meant to be relatively intact in PDA. So left hand side you have a PDA profile of autism, and the right hand side you have kind of a classic / more straightforward autism. I don't necessarily agree with that terminology. I tend to think the left-hand side is represented by features of co-occurring issues or difficulties. So I think PDA can be modelled and described by features belonging to accepted kind of difficulties like ADHD and anxiety, etc. And I think the right-hand side is just autism. But moving on. So yeah, what does a neurodevelopmental disorder look like? So there's a chapter in the DSM-5 and the DSM-5 text revision on neurodevelopmental disorders. So it contains like ADHD, autism, and intellectual disability. It points out that that neurodevelopmental disorders do often co-occur, and intend to specify to denote co-occurring issues and problems and stuff. Features often present before school age, but can change with course as a young person develops. So Yeah, features are often deficits that affect multiple functionings, but they can, well, appear that can affect multiple areas of functioning, but they can appear in excess, like too many restrictive repetitive behaviours and interests in autism. So, moving on. This is some definitions that are provided by Phil Christie in his conference talks on PDA. So he would say that pervasive is um, defined as suggests that the effects can be seen in all a child's development, and developmental means that the disorder is present at birth, gradually becoming apparent during the course of development, and disorder implies more than a straightforward delay. I do critique these definitions in a different video, which I'll put a link in the description to, but these are the kind of definitions used to underpin a PDA profile of autism. So, yeah. I would point out that if one looks at Elizabeth Newson's pervasive mental disorders diagram, she did not require them to have restricted repetitive behaviours and interests, and that's because in her diagram on page 599 of Newson et al. 2003, sorry, that the diagram includes specific language impairments, which is for dyslexia and aphasia, and they only have social communication issues. They don't actually have well, technically it's communication issues, but they have no restrictive repetitive behaviours and interest in them. So so Newton didn't need to have a PDA to have RBIs technically, although I'm sorry, I'm going off a tangent. I'll stay focused. If you look at Phil Christie's definitions for PDA as a pervasive mental disorder, and the algorithm put forward in Eaton and Weaver 2020, for their algorithm of demand avoidance, they do not require PDA to have restrictive repetitive behaviours and interests or social communication issues. They claim that PDA. They also claim that PDA has different strategies to PDA. Sorry, there's also claim that PDA has different strategies to autism. I would point out that PDA profile of autism definitions do not conform to neurodevelopmental disorder understandings, and I'll kind of show why. I mean that. Let me rephrase that. If one assumes that PDA is a profile of autism, the underlying assumptions which I'll just set out, especially on the previous slides, that means that that PDA profile of autism is inherently meets the definitions for a neurodevelopmental disorder. This makes sense because autism is autism is modelled as a neurodevelopmental disorder within the DSM-5, and therefore, if PDA profile of autism, it basically means that if autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder, then therefore PDA profile of autism is also a neurodevelopmental disorder. So therefore, what I'm trying to say is that PDA is a neurodevelopmental disorder, not a profile of autism. So carry on. So this is a screenshot of a paragraph in the supplementary files for Newson and colleagues 2003. What I'm trying to point out here is that Newson says that PDA social communication issues are relating towards identity and obligation. So they're not relating towards theory of mind or kind of a lacking of empathy per se. And that kind of matters because if you look at the Royal College of Psychiatry's descriptions of PDA, they do not. They describe it without social communication issues. So it kind of matters because if you look at what is the bare minimum aspects of a neurodevelopmental disorder within the DSM-5 and DSM-5-TR, if you look at ADHD, that says that the threshold only needs to be present in social interactions and one other setting, and that the behaviours need to be consistently manifest before the age of 12. So it's a lower diagnostic threshold than autism, which is pervasive and needs to be from early infancy. So yeah, that's one point here is that it's arbitrary to view PDA as having intrinsically like presenting from early infancy and being to pervasive levels and to come with empathy or theory of mind issues. So one can model and diagnose PDA without having those features to the kind of threshold of the demand of what's been expressed in social interactions and one of the area functioning and consistently manifested before the age of 12. That's what I'm kind of saying there, if one really wants to do that. Um, I should also point out, something I have forgotten to put in these slides, is that there are examples of Newton said in their work that people can transition into and out of PDA, and Wing et al. Lorna Wing in her critique of PDA points out that if you view PDA as an autism subtype, it will have the same issues as like Asperger's and PD-NOS and autistic disorder, that people can transition into and out of it over lifespan. So moving on. This is another screenshot from a paragraph from, again, page 2 in Newton and colleagues' supplementary file. Newton's talking about descriptions and how many of PDA descriptions a person needs to express in order to meet threshold for a PDA diagnosis. What she's saying here is that overall, no child will show all the behavioural examples listed any more than all autistic children will show a whole repertoire of autistic behaviours, but every child with clear-cut PDA will manifest overall complex pattern, not merely one or two features. This is important in differentiating from Asperger's or ADHD children, for instance. The objection that we all know an Asperger child who does this cannot be sustained when we're referring to such a complete pattern. So what she's saying is that if a person has received PDA diagnosis, they have to overall show like most of the kind of traits presented, but not all of them. So I kind of point out other reasons why you might want to identify PDA as a neurodevelopmental disorder independent from autism. So if you look at the Equalitax definition of impairment, which is from this screenshot here, it's basically what substantial long-term mean. It means that substantial is more than a minor or trivial. For example, it takes much longer than it usually would to complete a daily task like getting dressed, or long-term means 12 months or more, for example, a breathing condition that develops as a result of a lung infection. The point of this is that one can be impaired to their demand avoidance outside of autism, meeting these definitions. So the reason I'm saying this is that one can be viewed as discriminating against non-autistic PDAs if you only diagnose it in autistics as a profile of autism. I've also written 5 years ago that in a journal article that if one only identifies PDA in autistics, essentially waiting for a person to already have an autism diagnosis first, that risks biasing PDA clinical descriptions and studies, as it would basically mean diagnosing PDA in kind of the most severe or extreme presentations. The rationale for this is that multiple studies, I think it's about 8 now, are indicating that as a child, young person matures and basically grows old, becomes an adult, they will express less PDA features. So as a person's age increases, the amount of PDA features they tend to present tends to decrease. So the reason for this is that if you're waiting for a child or a person to have an autism diagnosis before diagnosing PDA, you're likely to be meeting that person later age. Therefore, you could be meeting the cases where the PDA features are still being presented. So what that means is those who have presenting slightly less PDA features might not meet threshold for a PDA diagnosis if you're only diagnosing them in autistics. It's also pointing out that predicted populations which PDA is seen in are based on Newton and colleagues' PDA descriptions, which are problematic thing is autism. So if you're diagnosing PDA as a form of autism, you might diagnose it differently to how you diagnose it outside of autism. So, for example, why would you assume that a non-autistic person has social comprehension issues, like having theory of mind and empathy issues? The reason I mention this is that the PDA descriptions have changed to become autism-like. So, for example, like the mixed behaviours are not indicative of autism, but more recent descriptions have changed that to slightly it's indicating like autism-like features. So, for example, the strategies of avoidance are essentially social manipulative has been changed to strategies of avoidance are essentially social manipulative, but the social manipulative are in quotation marks, indicating that the manipulative aspect is a mistake. Then it's changed to uses social strategies as part of avoidance, so e.g. distraction or giving excuses. So that kind of manipulative aspect has been kind of removed to it's become autism like the kind of trait wording has been. So why would you use the kind of latter wording when if you know that the person has relatively intact through random, you're more likely to say they have manipulative strategies for avoidance. So some examples of PDA being attributed as a standalone kind of construct. So we have the at least 150 cases that Newton and colleagues did. Newton did have more than 150 cases because she excluded cases which had like autism features from their database. There's also about 100 out of 375 kind of caregiver reported PDA diagnoses in the UK survey. Seem to have been standalone PDA diagnoses. There's also a relatively large caregiver research. We had like over 1,000 caregivers reporting they had autistic children, but they had some cases which had primary PDA cases which had no autism diagnosis. So the researchers excluded those children from the research who had primary PDA cases because they could not be sure that those children were autistic. So yeah, the data screen identified 91 cases that needed to be excluded from the final sample, kind of, or he or she had a primary diagnosis of pathological demand-avoidance. So yeah, there's also like one study by Lance and Gore and Nora Fredrickson, which had 4 out of their 22 PDA diagnoses were standalone PDA diagnoses, so there was no autism diagnosis out in those 4 cases. There's also a series of case studies of PDA which were diagnosed as a standalone entity, but and there's like 9 case studies across about 6 articles, I think. But 2 of those case studies were, while they were diagnosed as standalone, they viewed PDA to be a profile of autism or a part of the autism spectrum. So yeah, just mention that bit. So the DSM-5 and DSM-5, along with the like DSM-3 and the DSM-4, they all assume that people often struggle to meet threshold for the various kind of psychiatric categories within the diagnostic manuals, because people's spiky profiles just means it's difficult to kind of fit us into boxes. So they often will have residual categories for when people do not for not meeting diagnostic threshold for various diagnoses. So, for example, the DSM-5 TR has 2 residual categories for not meeting ADHD threshold. So that's the specified attention deficit/hyperactivity disorder, which is coding is F90.8, and the second one is unspecified attention deficit/hyperactivity disorder, and that code is F90.9. So if you look at the neurodevelopmental disorders chapter, there's 2 residual categories in there for not meeting threshold for other neurodevelopmental categories. So for one looks in there, one of those 2 is other specified neurodevelopmental disorder, which is code F88, and it's from page 100. And it's a very brief one. So basically, clinician explains in the formulation how the person does not meet threshold for other neurodevelopmental categories. So if one is doing a formulation of a PDA as a neurodevelopmental disorder, you just explain how they have PDA, basically, from my understanding. So in relation towards tools that can potentially use to identify PDA, there is the Extreme Demand-Avoidance Questionnaire, which is an observer-rated screening tool for PDA in children and persons, but it's meant to be only for children who do not have mild to severe intellectual disability, off the top of my head. It's not designed to be a diagnostic tool, but it has been used to identify PDA in a diagnostic capacity. There's another way of doing it, which is you can use a semi-structured interview that was developed by Liz Nyons and colleagues. I think it was Liz Nyons with Francesca Happe. It has been used in some Liz and I's research a couple of times. It's open access and it's seen in the supplementary files on page 3 to I's and colleagues' 2018 paper. There's 22 semi-structured interview questions in there, and they're based on Elizabeth Newton's descriptions, and they cover the entire 9 traits. So that's everything from language delay to neurological involvement to the avoidance strategies to comfortable role playing pretend, etc., etc. This version of the version of the semi-structured interview has been used to identify PDA by the Elizabeth Newton Centre, like going up to like 2015. I've got a version of which they use, but the version they use is basically the questions have descriptions in there for the kind of features they're looking for. But those descriptions obviously are not provided in the open access version. So yeah, so I'm just going to end it with some reflecting questions. So, do you agree with the assumptions behind PDA as a neurodevelopmental disorder? Would you identify PDA as a standalone category? Would you identify PDA assuming PDA has autism aspects like theory of mind issues? So, like, how could you identify PDA as a standalone neurodevelopmental disorder? So, like, which PDA criteria would you use? Which DSM-5 DSM-5 code would you use? And which PDA tools would you use? In that kind of scenario. So, these are my contact details, like my email, Twitter handle, /X handle, like my ResearchGate profile link, which I will be putting the slides up for this video on. Link on the channel which you'll be watching it on. Obviously there could be no questions. These are reference slides. I'll just linger on them for a few seconds each so you can pause the video if you wish to do so. There's only 4 reference slides, so it should be relatively short. And yeah, there's 25 references in total. So yeah, it's not too bad actually. I think I'm getting used to Numeric anyway. So we're going to end with may one's stemming activities be many and one's flow states long, which is equivalent to live long and prosper. So thank you for your time, and I hope you're having a good time with the video and everything else.